Hey guys, tonight we journey back to ancient Rome, where the streets were crowded, the laws were harsh, and punishment could arrive faster than mercy. Before you settle in, take a moment to like the video and subscribe if you enjoy these sleepy journeys through forgotten history. Now dim the lights, get comfortable, and let us wander into a world where one wrong decision could change the course of an ordinary life forever. The year is AD 118. The emperor sitting upon Rome's throne is Trajan. The empire stretches farther than ever before. Roman roads cross mountains and deserts. Merchant ships move endlessly across the Mediterranean. Legions guard distant frontiers thousands of miles from the capital. From a distance, Rome appears powerful, organized, and eternal. Yet for ordinary people, daily life remains uncertain, especially when the law becomes involved. Our story begins before sunrise on a cool autumn morning. A young man named Marcus Valerius walked through the narrow streets of Rome, carrying a basket of bread. Marcus was not a senator, not a soldier, not a wealthy merchant. He was the son of a baker, 23 years old, neither rich nor poor. His family owned a small bakery near the Tiber River. Every morning before dawn, he delivered fresh loaves to customers across several districts. It was honest work, demanding work that required waking long before the rest of the city. The streets were still dark when Marcus left the bakery. Oil lamps flickered beside doorways. Cats moved silently through alleys. The smell of smoke lingered from cooking fires, extinguished hours earlier. He followed the same route he had traveled hundreds of times. Across a small marketplace, past several apartment blocks, around a shrine dedicated to household gods, then toward a neighborhood where craftsmen rented workshops. Nothing seemed unusual, at least not initially. A pair of city watchmen stood near a crossroads. A wagon creaked across uneven stones. A water seller prepared his barrels for the day. The city slowly awakened around him. Yet fate often hides within ordinary mornings. Marcus completed several deliveries. The basket became lighter. The sky brightened. Then he reached the workshop of a bronze worker named Lucius. The door stood open. That alone seemed strange. Lucius normally opened later. Marcus approached, called his name, received no answer. Curious, he stepped inside. The workshop appeared disturbed. Tools lay scattered. A table had been overturned. Broken pottery covered part of the floor, and beside the furnace rested Lucius himself. Motionless, Marcus immediately understood something terrible had happened. The bronze worker was dead. Fear arrived instantly, not because Marcus had committed any crime, because every Roman understood a dangerous truth. Being innocent did not always prevent trouble, especially when found beside a corpse. Marcus backed away. His heartbeat accelerated. He considered running, then remembered that fleeing could appear suspicious, so he remained where he stood. Moments later, another craftsman entered, then another. Within minutes, a crowd gathered outside. Questions filled the air. Who found him? What happened? When did it occur? Someone summoned officials. The waiting felt endless. Eventually, 2 magistrate assistants arrived. Neither appeared interested in comforting anyone. Instead, they began asking questions. Direct questions, sharp questions, questions that immediately focused upon Marcus. Why had he entered the workshop? Why was he alone with the body? Why had nobody else witnessed the discovery? Marcus answered honestly. He delivered bread. The door was open. He called for Lucius, then entered. Simple, reasonable, true, yet truth alone did not guarantee safety. The assistants examined the room. They found signs of struggle, a missing money chest, blood upon the floor. Then they discovered something else, a torn piece of cloth. The color resembled the tunic Marcus wore. Not identical, similar. That similarity proved sufficient to change everything. The questions intensified. Witnesses were interviewed. Rumors spread. People began forming opinions before any formal investigation occurred. Rome possessed laws. Rome possessed courts. Rome possessed procedures. But Rome also possessed human beings. Human beings enjoy reaching conclusions, particularly when frightened. By midday, Marcus found himself escorted through crowded streets, not yet convicted, not yet formally charged, nevertheless no longer free. His family watched helplessly. His mother cried openly. His father argued with officials. The argument achieved nothing. The assistants insisted further inquiry was necessary. Marcus was taken to a holding facility used for suspects awaiting examination. The building was unpleasant. Stone walls, iron bars, little light, little comfort. Inside, he encountered other prisoners. Some appeared angry, others exhausted. A few looked resigned, as though they had accepted whatever outcome awaited them. For the first time, Marcus understood how quickly circumstances could change. Hours earlier, he had been delivering bread. Now he sat behind bars, waiting, uncertain, listening to distant footsteps echo through corridors. The Roman legal system varied according to social status. This reality shaped nearly every aspect of punishment. A wealthy citizen often received treatment different from that given to a laborer. A senator occupied one category, a common citizen another, a slave another entirely. The law was not always equal. Status mattered. Connections mattered. Money mattered. Marcus possessed none of these advantages. His family owned a bakery. Nothing more. As evening approached, another official arrived. Older, experienced, a man named Quintus Aelius. Unlike the assistants, he seemed patient, observant, careful, He questioned Marcus for nearly an hour. Every movement, every delivery, every conversation from the previous day. Marcus answered repeatedly. The same story, again and again. Quintus listened, sometimes writing notes, sometimes remaining silent. The silence often felt more intimidating than the questions. Eventually, the official stood, gathered his tablets, and prepared to leave. Before exiting, he paused, then offered a statement Marcus would remember for years. The innocent fear investigation, because they do not understand it. He hesitated. The guilty fear investigation, because they do. Then he departed, leaving Marcus alone with those words. Night settled over Rome. Prisoners received a simple meal. Bread, water, nothing more. The building grew quieter. Yet Marcus found no sleep. Thoughts circled endlessly. What if witnesses lied? What if evidence was misunderstood? What if officials needed someone to blame? Outside his cell, a guard passed occasionally carrying a lamp. Shadows stretched across the corridor walls. Hours drifted by. Near midnight, a commotion erupted elsewhere in the facility. Raised voices, a cry, then silence. Another prisoner whispered an explanation. A slave had been transferred for interrogation. The word alone unsettled everyone nearby. Interrogation in Rome could mean many things, some lawful, some brutal, particularly when slaves were involved. Roman authorities often believed torture could extract truth from enslaved individuals. The practice was accepted by many, questioned by few. Marcus lay awake, considering that reality. He was fortunate to be a citizen, yet even citizens could face severe treatment under certain circumstances. The empire's reputation for order rested partly upon fear. Fear of punishment, fear of authority, fear of consequences. And tomorrow, Marcus suspected, he would learn just how powerful those fears could become. As dawn approached, footsteps echoed once more through the corridor. Several guards appeared, not stopping at other cells, stopping at his. One unlocked the door. Another motioned forward. Marcus rose slowly. His stomach tightened, because no explanation was offered. Only a command. Come with us. And with that, the young baker stepped into the corridor, unaware that he was about to witness the first of Rome's many methods for dealing with those accused of breaking the law. Marcus followed the guards through a maze of stone corridors, illuminated by flickering oil lamps. The prison seemed larger in daylight, more oppressive. What had appeared mysterious during the night now revealed itself as something far less dramatic and far more unpleasant. Damp walls, stale air, the smell of sweat, mildew, and fear. Some prisoners watched silently from behind iron bars as Marcus passed. Others avoided eye contact entirely. Many had likely learned that curiosity could attract unwanted attention. The guards eventually stopped before a heavy wooden door, reinforced with iron bands. One knocked. A voice answered from inside. The door opened. Marcus was ushered into a chamber, unlike any room he had previously seen. Several officials sat behind a long table. Wax tablets rested before them. Documents were stacked neatly in baskets. Everything looked orderly, deliberate, almost calm. Yet Marcus quickly realized this room held immense power, because decisions made here could alter lives forever. At the center sat Quintus Aelius, the experienced official who had questioned him the previous day. His expression revealed nothing, neither sympathy nor hostility, only patience. Marcus was instructed to stand. Then the questioning resumed. This time it was more formal. Witness statements had already been collected. Evidence had been examined. Several craftsmen from the neighborhood had offered accounts regarding Lucius, the dead bronze worker. Some described him as respected. Others described him as argumentative. One claimed Lucius frequently quarreled over money. Another insisted he had recently feared theft. The picture that emerged was incomplete, messy, human, which often made investigations difficult. Real life rarely arranged itself into neat stories. Quintus listened to testimony, asked questions, compared details. Hours passed. Marcus answered the same inquiries repeatedly. Where had he been? Who had seen him? What time had he arrived? Did he know the victim well? Did he owe him money? Had they argued? The young baker remained consistent. He had delivered bread, nothing more. Eventually, a new witness entered, an elderly woman who lived across the street from the workshop. She walked slowly, leaning upon a wooden cane. At first, Marcus felt hopeful. Perhaps she had seen something important. Perhaps she could confirm his innocence. Instead, her testimony created additional uncertainty. She claimed she had observed a man leaving the workshop late the previous evening, but darkness prevented identification. She could not describe the face, only the height. Unfortunately, the description roughly matched Marcus. Not precisely, close enough. The room grew quieter. A few officials exchanged glances. Marcus felt his confidence weaken. An innocent man often assumes facts will naturally protect him. Yet facts sometimes arrive incomplete, sometimes distorted, sometimes hidden entirely. The hearing ended near midday. No verdict was announced. No decision explained. Marcus was returned to his cell. The waiting continued. For many Romans, punishment itself began long before conviction. Uncertainty could be its own form of suffering. Hours became days. Days became nearly a week. During that time, Marcus observed prison life closely. Food remained simple. Water was rationed. Comfort barely existed. Yet compared to what some prisoners described, conditions were relatively mild. Many shared stories about fines, stories about public humiliation, stories about exile, stories about executions. Some were undoubtedly exaggerated. Others sounded entirely believable. One elderly prisoner spoke of punishments imposed decades earlier during another emperor's reign. He described public floggings conducted before crowds. The purpose extended beyond pain. Roman punishments often served as lessons. Authorities wanted people to see consequences. Fear worked best when visible. A hidden punishment influenced one person. A public punishment influenced thousands. The old man explained how criminals were sometimes paraded through streets before receiving sentence. Citizens gathered to watch. Children climbed onto walls for a better view. Vendors sold food nearby. What modern people might consider horrifying often became public entertainment. Rome's population loved spectacles. The arena demonstrated this. Executions sometimes demonstrated it as well. Marcus listened carefully, not because he enjoyed the stories, because his future remained uncertain. Every tale seemed like a glimpse into possible outcomes. One evening, another prisoner arrived, a young slave named Diodorus. He had been accused of assisting thieves. The accusation alone frightened him. Marcus quickly noticed bruises on his arms. The marks appeared recent. Other prisoners noticed too. Nobody asked questions. Everyone already understood. Under Roman law, slaves occupied a very different legal position than citizens. Authorities frequently relied upon physical coercion when questioning enslaved individuals. Many Romans believed torture could reveal hidden truths. The logic seems strange today. Even many ancient observers doubted its reliability. Pain often encourages people to say whatever interrogators wish to hear. Yet the practice endured because powerful institutions rarely abandon methods they believe useful. Several nights later, Marcus witnessed a small example of Rome's justice system in action. A thief was brought into the prison, not a murderer, not a rebel, a thief. The man had stolen goods from a market stall. Multiple witnesses had observed the act. The evidence was overwhelming. His case moved quickly, faster than Marcus expected. The following morning, he was taken before local officials. By afternoon, he returned briefly to collect his belongings. His sentence had already been decided. Public flogging, nothing more, nothing less. Marcus watched from a barred window, overlooking a nearby square. A crowd gathered rapidly. News traveled fast in Rome. The condemned man was tied to a wooden frame. An official read the charge. The sentence followed, then punishment. The blows echoed across the square. Many spectators watched attentively. Some appeared satisfied, others indifferent. A few looked away. The thief cried out initially. Later, he merely endured. Afterward, he was released. Injured, humiliated, very unlikely to forget the experience. The purpose had been achieved. The crowd had witnessed consequences. The authorities had reinforced order, and everyone returned to daily life. Marcus remained troubled long afterward because he realized something important. Roman punishments were not always designed primarily to reform. Often they aimed to deter, to warn, to demonstrate power. Justice and fear frequently traveled together. Another week passed. Then at last, a breakthrough occurred. Late one afternoon, guards arrived once again. Marcus expected another hearing. Instead, they escorted him to Quintus Aelius. The official stood beside a table covered with documents. His expression seemed different this time, more focused, less uncertain. A second investigation had uncovered new evidence. A merchant from another district had attempted to sell several bronze tools. The tools carried marks, identifying them as property of Lucius. Questioning the merchant led authorities to another suspect, a laborer with significant gambling debts. Witnesses placed him near the workshop shortly before the murder. Additional evidence connected him to the stolen money chest. The case had shifted dramatically. Marcus listened in disbelief. For days, his future had balanced upon incomplete information. Now everything changed, not because officials suddenly trusted him, because new facts emerged. The official informed him that formal charges would not proceed. He was free to leave. Free. The word felt unreal. Marcus thanked Quintus repeatedly. The older man accepted the gratitude politely, then offered another lesson, one Marcus would never forget. The law searches for certainty. He paused, yet certainty often arrives slowly. Those words lingered in Marcus's thoughts long after he departed. His family welcomed him home with tears of relief. The bakery resumed normal operations. Customers returned. Life appeared to recover, at least outwardly. But Marcus had changed. The experience left him with questions. Questions about law. Questions about punishment. Questions about the immense machinery governing Roman society. Most citizens rarely examined that machinery until it affected them personally. Now he had seen a small part of it, and curiosity began replacing fear. Months later, an opportunity emerged unexpectedly. A cousin named Titus secured employment, assisting clerks attached to a magistrate's office. The work involved copying records, maintaining documents, organizing legal proceedings. Nothing glamorous, yet it provided access to information. Titus occasionally shared stories, not secrets, simply observations regarding the wide variety of cases passing through Roman courts. One evening, Marcus visited his cousin after work. The conversation turned toward punishment. Titus described fines imposed upon dishonest merchants, property seizures, forced labor, whippings, exile. The range surprised Marcus. Many people imagine ancient justice as consisting only of executions. Reality proved more complex. Rome possessed an enormous legal system. Different crimes received different penalties. Social rank influenced outcomes. Local circumstances mattered. Political concerns mattered. Everything depended upon context. Then Titus mentioned a case currently attracting attention. A former tax collector accused of corruption. The charges involved bribery and embezzlement. Large sums of money had disappeared. Powerful individuals were involved. The investigation was advancing rapidly. Marcus listened with interest because, unlike the market thief, this accused man belonged to a wealthy family. His trial would reveal something important: how Rome treated criminals when status and influence entered the equation. And within days, Marcus would find himself standing among a crowd outside a courthouse, watching proceedings that would expose another side of Roman punishment, far different from the flogging he had recently witnessed. The courthouse stood near one of Rome's busiest districts, surrounded by shops, vendors, and citizens who seemed to possess an endless appetite for news. Marcus arrived shortly after sunrise. Already a crowd had gathered. People spoke in low voices. Rumors passed from one group to another. Some claimed the accused tax collector had stolen enough money to purchase a small estate. Others insisted powerful friends would ensure he escaped punishment. No one seemed entirely certain, yet everyone appeared interested. Public trials often attracted spectators. Romans enjoyed watching legal battles almost as much as they enjoyed watching athletic contests. Both involved winners, both involved losers, and both revealed something about power. Marcus found a place near the edge of the crowd. The accused eventually arrived under guard. His name was Gaius Severus. He wore expensive clothing. His posture remained confident, unlike the frightened prisoners Marcus had seen in jail. Gaius carried himself like a man accustomed to influence. Several friends accompanied him. Their presence alone demonstrated his social standing. Few ordinary citizens enjoyed such support. The proceedings lasted for days. Witnesses appeared. Documents were examined. Arguments filled the chamber. Unlike cases involving simple theft, this trial revolved around records, contracts, and financial accounts. Complex matters required patience. Marcus attended whenever work allowed. The experience revealed another important truth. Roman justice could move slowly when wealthy individuals became involved, not necessarily because judges were corrupt, often because important people possessed resources. They could hire skilled advocates. They could gather evidence. They could challenge accusations. Poor defendants rarely enjoyed similar advantages. Eventually, a verdict emerged. Gaius was found guilty. The evidence proved overwhelming. Money intended for public projects had disappeared. Bribes had been accepted. Official duties had been abused. The crowd expected imprisonment. Some expected execution. Instead, the sentence surprised many. Exile, permanent exile, property confiscation, loss of position, loss of status, loss of political future, no flogging, no public beating, no execution platform. Marcus discussed the outcome with Titus later that evening. His cousin explained that punishments varied greatly depending upon the crime and the social position of the offender. Execution certainly existed, but authorities often preferred other penalties when dealing with citizens of higher rank. Exile could destroy a life without creating a martyr. Property seizures enriched the state. Public disgrace damaged entire families. In some cases, such punishments proved more devastating than physical pain. A man accustomed to wealth could suffer enormously when stripped of everything. The conversation continued long into the night. Titus described records he had encountered while copying documents. Some involved fraud, others involved assault, several involved forgery. The punishments varied considerably. Rome possessed no single response to crime. Authorities selected penalties they believed appropriate to each situation. The empire was vast. Its legal system reflected that complexity. Months passed. Winter approached. Marcus settled back into routine. The bakery remained busy. Customers prepared for seasonal festivals. Business improved. Life finally felt stable again. Then one afternoon, a customer entered carrying unusual news. A military veteran had been arrested, not for theft, not for murder, for desertion. The charge immediately attracted attention. Military discipline formed the backbone of Roman power. Without the legions, the empire could not survive. Consequently, authorities treated military offenses seriously. Marcus heard the story repeatedly over the following days. Each retelling introduced new details. The veteran allegedly abandoned his unit years earlier during a campaign near the frontier. He had returned home and attempted to disappear into ordinary life. For a time he succeeded. Then someone recognized him. An investigation followed. Now he awaited judgment. Curiosity led Marcus to seek more information. Eventually, Titus introduced him to a clerk familiar with military cases. The clerk explained that Roman commanders possessed significant authority regarding discipline. Punishments inside the army could be severe. The reasoning was straightforward. A soldier's failure endangered others. Cowardice could cost lives. Disobedience could destroy entire campaigns. Therefore, military justice often emphasized deterrence. Fear maintained order. Order maintained survival. The clerk described historical punishments Marcus found difficult to imagine. One particularly infamous practice involved decimation. Although rare by this period, Romans still remembered it. If a military unit committed serious offenses, such as mutiny or cowardice, every 10th soldier could be selected by lot and executed by his own comrades. The punishment terrified generations of soldiers. Its reputation endured long after its frequent use disappeared. Marcus listened in stunned silence. The concept seemed almost unbelievable. Yet Roman history contained many examples demonstrating how seriously military authorities regarded discipline. The empire's survival often depended upon obedience. A few weeks later, the veteran's sentence became known. Execution, not because he had stolen, not because he had harmed civilians, because abandoning military duty struck at the foundation of Roman power. The punishment served as a warning to every soldier who might consider similar actions. Marcus never witnessed the execution personally, yet discussions about it spread throughout the city. Many approved, others felt sympathy. Almost everyone understood the message. Certain crimes threatened more than individuals. They threatened institutions, and Rome protected its institutions fiercely. By the following spring, another incident captured public attention. This one occurred in a crowded marketplace. Marcus happened to be present when it unfolded. The morning had begun normally. Merchants arranged goods. Customers negotiated prices. Children darted between stalls. The usual noise filled the air. Then shouting erupted near a jewelry vendor. People turned simultaneously. A young man sprinted through the crowd, carrying a small pouch. Behind him ran an elderly merchant yelling accusations. Thief! The word instantly transformed the atmosphere. Several bystanders attempted to intercept the fleeing man. One succeeded. The thief stumbled. Others joined the pursuit. Within moments, he found himself pinned against the ground. The crowd surrounded him rapidly. Some shouted insults. Others demanded punishment immediately. The situation grew dangerous. Mob anger often escalated quickly. Fortunately, city officials arrived before violence could worsen. The accused was taken away. Order gradually returned. Yet Marcus noticed something unsettling. Many spectators seemed disappointed. They had wanted instant justice. A trial required patience. Patience rarely satisfied angry crowds. That evening Marcus reflected upon the incident. Roman authorities constantly balanced two responsibilities. They needed to maintain public confidence. They also needed to prevent uncontrolled revenge. Punishments served both purposes. Official penalties reassured citizens that crimes carried consequences. Without that reassurance, people might attempt justice themselves. The distinction mattered greatly because mob punishment could become unpredictable, cruel, chaotic. The state preferred punishment to remain under state control. As the years passed, Marcus developed a deeper understanding of Roman law than most ordinary citizens, not because he studied formally, because experience forced him to pay attention. His own arrest had awakened an interest he never expected. Titus occasionally supplied new stories. Magistrates occasionally discussed notable cases. Every example revealed another layer of the system. Some aspects appeared surprisingly sophisticated. Others appeared undeniably harsh. One summer evening, Titus arrived at the bakery carrying several tablets. His expression suggested excitement. "I've seen something unusual," he said. Marcus invited him inside. The bakery had closed for the day. Only family members remained. Titus placed the tablets on a table. The records described a criminal conspiracy uncovered near the harbor. Multiple suspects, stolen cargo, bribed officials, forged documents. The investigation stretched across several districts. Dozens of witnesses had already testified. Yet one detail attracted Marcus's attention immediately. Among the accused were several slaves, and their treatment differed dramatically from that of the free citizens involved. The contrast revealed one of the harshest realities within Roman society, a reality many citizens preferred not to discuss. When slaves stood accused of crimes, the punishments awaiting them could be far more severe, far more brutal. And as the harbor investigation expanded, Marcus would soon witness firsthand how Rome's legal system could treat different people in profoundly different ways, depending upon their status in society. The harbor district never truly slept. Even before sunrise, workers hauled cargo across wooden docks. Sailors shouted instructions. Ropes creaked. Crates shifted from ships, arriving from distant provinces. The smell of salt water mixed with fish, tar, smoke, and sweat. Marcus had visited the area many times while delivering bread. Yet after hearing about the conspiracy investigation, he found himself paying closer attention. The harbor represented one of the empire's great arteries. Goods arrived from every direction: Egyptian grain, Spanish olive oil, African livestock, Eastern spices. Thousands of people depended upon this endless movement of commerce. Where wealth gathered, crime inevitably followed. Several weeks after Titus mentioned the case, rumors spread throughout Rome. More arrests had occurred. Additional evidence had emerged. Officials believed a large network had been stealing cargo for years. Merchants complained. Warehouse owners demanded action. Political leaders wanted results. Pressure mounted. The authorities responded aggressively. One morning, Titus invited Marcus to observe part of the proceedings, not inside the main hearing itself. Ordinary citizens rarely enjoyed such access, but nearby, where witnesses and officials gathered, Marcus accepted immediately. Curiosity overcame caution. When they arrived, the scale of the investigation became apparent. Guards stood at entrances. Clerks carried stacks of records. Witnesses waited under supervision. The atmosphere felt tense. Everyone seemed aware that significant consequences were approaching. The accused included merchants, dock workers, warehouse supervisors, account keepers, several slaves, and even one minor official responsible for inspecting shipments. The conspiracy had reached farther than many expected. That discovery alone embarrassed the authorities. Rome valued the appearance of order. Public revelations of corruption threatened that image. As Marcus listened to conversations among clerks, he noticed an obvious difference. The free citizens involved appeared worried. The slaves appeared terrified. Not worried, terrified. The distinction was unmistakable. One young slave sat quietly beside a wall. His hands trembled. His eyes rarely lifted from the ground. Another stared into space, as though already imagining his fate. Marcus remembered Diodorus from prison years earlier. The bruises, the fear, the resignation, nothing seemed to have changed. Later that day, Titus explained why. Under Roman law, enslaved individuals occupied a fundamentally different position than free citizens. Authorities often viewed their testimony with suspicion unless obtained through physical coercion. The practice was deeply embedded within the legal system. Many Romans considered it normal. Marcus increasingly found it disturbing. As the investigation continued, testimony poured in. Some suspects blamed others. Others denied everything. Several attempted to negotiate leniency. Documents revealed stolen shipments, false records, altered accounts. The evidence accumulated steadily. Then one afternoon news spread that a crucial witness had finally confessed. A warehouse slave. His testimony connected multiple suspects. Within hours, the entire direction of the case shifted. Additional arrests followed. The conspiracy began unraveling. Citizens discussed the matter across Rome. In bakeries, bathhouses, markets, workshops, everywhere people debated the same questions. Who was responsible? How extensive was the corruption? And perhaps most importantly, what punishments would follow? Months later, the verdicts finally arrived. The outcomes varied considerably. Several merchants lost substantial property. Fines crippled their businesses. One official was removed from office and exiled. A warehouse supervisor received forced labor. Others faced imprisonment. Yet the harshest punishments fell upon the enslaved conspirators. Some were executed. Others were branded. A few were sold far from Rome. Families were separated. Lives shattered. The contrast was impossible to ignore. Marcus understood that Roman law did not treat everyone equally. Many citizens accepted this reality without question. Others simply avoided discussing it. Yet once noticed, it became difficult to forget. The harbor conspiracy eventually faded from public attention. New scandals emerged. New disputes arose. Life moved forward. Rome always possessed another story, another controversy, another crime, another punishment. Years passed. Marcus approached his 30th birthday. His father's health gradually declined. Responsibility for the bakery increasingly shifted onto his shoulders. The business expanded modestly. Nothing spectacular. Enough to provide stability. Enough to support the family. For a time, life seemed peaceful. Then an event occurred that shook the entire city. A fire, not a small fire, a major one. It began in a storage district near several warehouses. At first, people assumed it would be contained. Rome experienced fires regularly. The city contained countless wooden structures. Narrow streets often accelerated disaster. Residents understood the danger, but this fire spread faster than expected. Strong winds carried sparks across rooftops. Buildings ignited one after another. Smoke darkened the sky. Panic followed. Marcus joined hundreds of citizens attempting to save property. Water buckets moved through crowded streets. Families carried possessions. Animals were driven away from danger. The effort continued through the night. Exhaustion replaced fear. Fear returned whenever flames appeared nearby. By dawn, several city blocks had suffered extensive damage. Investigations began almost immediately. Whenever disaster struck Rome, authorities searched for explanations. Sometimes natural causes proved responsible. Sometimes negligence. Occasionally crime. The possibility of arson generated enormous concern. Deliberately setting fire to property represented a serious offense. In a crowded city, one person's actions could endanger thousands. Consequently, Roman authorities treated such accusations harshly. Within days, several suspects emerged. One in particular attracted attention. A laborer named Publius. Witnesses claimed they had seen him near the origin of the blaze. Others reported previous arguments involving warehouse owners. Rumors multiplied rapidly, perhaps too rapidly. Marcus recognized familiar patterns. A dramatic event, public anger, a suspect, growing certainty before all facts were known. The memory of his own arrest returned vividly. Fortunately, investigators proceeded carefully. Evidence required examination. Witness accounts required verification. The process consumed weeks. Eventually, authorities reached a conclusion. The fire had not been deliberate. An accident, improperly stored materials, combined with bad luck and strong winds. Publius was released. No punishment followed. Yet the episode revealed something important. Roman authorities viewed arson differently from ordinary property crimes. The potential consequences were simply too great. Crimes threatening public safety often received particularly severe attention. A few months after the fire, Marcus encountered another example. This time, the offense involved counterfeit coins. The discovery emerged gradually. Merchants noticed irregularities. Money changers became suspicious. Certain coins weighed slightly less than expected. Others contained inferior metals. The fraud threatened trust within the economy. Trust remained essential. Without confidence in currency, commerce suffered. Without commerce, Rome suffered. Authorities launched an aggressive investigation. Several workshops were searched. Tools were confiscated. Suspects were questioned. The operation eventually uncovered a small network producing counterfeit currency. Public reaction proved intense. Many citizens considered the crime especially dangerous, not because individual losses were enormous, because the offense undermined something everyone depended upon: the state's monetary system. Punishments reflected that concern. The counterfeiters received sentences far harsher than many thieves. Their actions threatened more than personal property. They threatened economic stability. Roman justice frequently distinguished between ordinary crimes and offenses, perceived as attacks upon public order. The difference mattered a great deal. One autumn evening, Marcus and Titus sat outside the bakery discussing these matters. The streets had grown quiet. Most customers had already returned home. The air carried the first hints of approaching winter. Titus leaned against a wall. "Have you noticed something?" he asked. Marcus considered the question. "What?" "The harshest punishments rarely follow the largest thefts." Marcus frowned. "What do you mean?" Titus pointed toward the city beyond. "The state fears disorder more than stolen property." The observation lingered, and the more Marcus considered it, the more sense it made. Military desertion, counterfeit currency, major corruption, arson, large conspiracies. These crimes threatened systems, institutions, structures supporting Roman power. Simple theft harmed individuals. Other offenses endangered the machinery of the empire itself. Authorities responded accordingly. As years continued passing, Marcus witnessed countless examples supporting that conclusion. Yet none would prove more dramatic than the events soon approaching, because whispers had begun circulating through Rome. Whispers involving secret meetings, illegal gatherings, dangerous ideas. At first, few people paid attention. Then officials began making arrests. And suddenly, the city found itself confronting a type of crime Rome often feared more than theft, fraud, or even violence: the crime of challenging authority itself. At first, the rumors seemed insignificant. Rome was a city built upon rumors. Everyday citizens exchanged stories in bathhouses, marketplaces, workshops, and taverns. Most faded within a week. Many proved false. Others became exaggerated beyond recognition. Yet the whispers spreading through the city that winter felt different. They persisted. They grew. And eventually, they reached the ears of people who possessed the power to act. The stories centered around secret gatherings held after dark, not criminal gangs, not thieves, not smugglers, something else. Groups of individuals meeting privately in homes and rented rooms, discussing ideas, sharing beliefs, refusing to participate in certain public ceremonies. The details remained unclear. What mattered was that officials had begun paying attention. Marcus first heard about the matter from a customer. The man purchased bread every week. A retired soldier, practical, usually uninterested in gossip. That morning, however, he seemed unusually serious. They arrested 3 men near the Esquiline Hill. Marcus looked up. For what crime? The soldier shrugged. Depends who you ask. That answer proved unsatisfying, yet it reflected the situation perfectly. Nobody seemed entirely certain. Some claimed the suspects belonged to an illegal religious group. Others insisted they were plotting against local authorities. A few suggested both accusations were true. The uncertainty only fueled public interest. Several days later, Titus arrived carrying fresh information. As usual, clerks and officials had been discussing recent developments. The arrests were real. More were expected. Authorities suspected an unauthorized organization was operating within the city. The concern extended beyond religious beliefs. Rome generally tolerated a remarkable variety of gods and customs. Throughout the empire, people worshipped countless deities. Local traditions often survived for centuries. The issue arose when groups appeared unwilling to acknowledge Roman authority or participate in civic obligations. That distinction mattered greatly. Roman leaders valued stability. Anything perceived as threatening social cohesion attracted attention. Marcus listened carefully. Over the years, he had observed a pattern. Authorities rarely reacted strongly to unusual beliefs alone. They reacted strongly when those beliefs seemed connected to resistance, secrecy, or disobedience. The lines separating the two could become dangerously thin. Weeks passed. Additional arrests followed. Public discussions intensified. Some citizens demanded harsh action. Others questioned whether any real threat existed. The debate spread throughout Rome. One evening, Marcus visited a bathhouse after work. Groups of men stood discussing the situation. Their opinions varied dramatically. One merchant argued that secret organizations undermined trust. If people gathered privately beyond official oversight, dangerous ideas could spread. A teacher disagreed. He argued that private meetings did not automatically create danger. The discussion continued for nearly an hour. No consensus emerged. Yet one fact became increasingly clear. Fear often expanded faster than evidence. Eventually, several hearings were conducted. Marcus attended one whenever work allowed. The atmosphere differed from ordinary criminal trials. There were no stolen goods displayed as evidence, no murder weapons, no financial records. Instead, the proceedings focused heavily upon loyalty, associations, activities, relationships. Questions repeatedly returned to the same theme. Who attended these gatherings? What occurred during them? Were participants loyal citizens? Did they obey Roman law? The accused answered cautiously. Some admitted membership. Others denied involvement. Witness testimony conflicted. As often happened, certainty proved elusive. Yet the authorities remained determined. For Rome, preserving order ranked among the highest priorities. Sometimes that priority produced difficult consequences. Several defendants eventually received punishments. Not execution, not torture, instead exile, surveillance, restrictions. The penalties varied according to individual circumstances. Still, the message remained obvious. Rome tolerated many things. Challenges to public order occupied a different category. Marcus left the hearings thoughtful. Throughout his life, he had witnessed numerous forms of punishment: flogging, exile, property confiscation, execution, forced labor, branding. Each served a purpose. Sometimes the purpose involved justice, sometimes deterrence, sometimes maintaining authority, often all three. The experience deepened his understanding of the empire. Roman punishment was never solely about the individual standing before a magistrate. It was also about everyone watching, everyone listening, everyone learning what consequences awaited particular actions. That lesson became even clearer the following year. The event began with something remarkably ordinary: a dispute between neighbors. Nothing unusual. Cities everywhere contained disagreements, arguments over property, noise, boundaries, animals. Rome proved no exception. In this case, the conflict involved adjoining apartment buildings. A wall separated the properties. One owner claimed damage had occurred during renovations. The other denied responsibility. Initially, the disagreement remained civil. Then tempers worsened. Accusations multiplied. Soon lawsuits followed. Marcus learned about the matter through a customer connected to one of the families. The story interested him because it demonstrated another side of Roman justice. Not every legal dispute involved criminals. Many centered upon civil disagreements, contracts, property rights, financial obligations, inheritance. The empire devoted enormous effort to resolving such issues. The courts heard countless cases that never resulted in imprisonment or physical punishment. Instead, judges imposed fines, compensation payments, or other remedies. In the wall dispute, experts examined the damage. Witnesses testified. Measurements were taken. Documents reviewed. After months of proceedings, responsibility was assigned. The losing party paid substantial compensation. No one was whipped, no one imprisoned, no one exiled. Yet the financial consequences proved painful. The outcome reminded Marcus that punishment could take many forms. Money itself often served as a powerful tool. A large fine could devastate a family, destroy a business, alter a person's future. Physical suffering represented only one method available to the state. As the years advanced, Marcus increasingly noticed how carefully Roman authorities categorized offenses. Different crimes threatened different interests. Different interests inspired different responses. Violence against individuals, fraud, military misconduct, public disorder, religious controversies, property disputes, each occupied its own place within the legal landscape. Yet among all these categories, one remained particularly feared: treason. Even speaking the word caused people to lower their voices. The accusation carried enormous weight because treason involved more than breaking a law. It involved betraying the state itself. Fortunately, such cases remained relatively rare. Most citizens never encountered one personally. Marcus expected to remain among them. He was wrong. The first sign appeared during a spring morning. The bakery had opened early. Customers arrived steadily. Business seemed normal. Then soldiers entered. Not one, several. Their presence immediately attracted attention. Conversations stopped. People watched. The soldiers approached a nearby shop owned by a metalworker. Marcus recognized the man. His name was Flavius, a quiet craftsman, middle-aged, respected within the neighborhood. No one expected trouble, yet trouble arrived anyway. The soldiers entered. Minutes later, they emerged escorting Flavius away. The metalworker appeared stunned. Neighbors gathered rapidly. Questions filled the street. What happened? What crime had he committed? No answers emerged, only speculation. By evening, rumors spread across the district. Some claimed he had insulted an important official. Others alleged connections to political agitators. A few suggested involvement in forged documents. Nobody knew the truth. Several days later, more information surfaced. Authorities believed certain individuals had distributed writings criticizing government decisions. The investigation expanded. Additional searches occurred. Additional arrests followed. Suddenly, a local metalworker found himself entangled in a matter far larger than anyone imagined. Marcus watched events unfold with growing concern. Experience had taught him how quickly accusations could transform lives. He also understood that crimes touching politics often received extraordinary attention. States rarely respond calmly when they perceive challenges to their authority. As the investigation continued, tension spread throughout the neighborhood. People spoke more carefully. Gatherings became quieter. Conversations ended when strangers approached. No one wanted unnecessary scrutiny. The atmosphere itself became a form of punishment. Fear encouraged caution. Caution encouraged silence. Weeks later, news finally emerged regarding the charges, and what citizens learned shocked many throughout Rome, because the authorities were no longer treating the case as simple criticism. They were treating it as something far more dangerous, a possible conspiracy against the government itself, a charge that, if proven, could lead to some of the most severe punishments available under Roman law. The announcement spread through Rome with astonishing speed. A possible conspiracy against the government. Those words alone were enough to transform a local investigation into a citywide obsession. Merchants discussed it beside market stalls. Customers debated it while waiting for bread. Sailors carried stories from one dock to another. Even people who normally ignored politics suddenly paid attention. The reason was simple. Most crimes threatened individuals. A conspiracy threatened the state, and Rome reacted strongly whenever the security of the state appeared endangered. Marcus found himself following developments closely, not because he enjoyed political matters. In truth, he preferred the predictable routine of the bakery. But years earlier, he had learned how powerful legal accusations could become. Once authorities focused upon someone, ordinary life could disappear overnight. Flavius, the neighborhood metalworker, represented a perfect example. Only weeks earlier, he had been repairing tools and selling household items. Now he sat in custody, awaiting judgment. His workshop remained closed. His family struggled without income. Regardless of the eventual verdict, punishment had already begun. The investigation expanded throughout the spring. Officials examined correspondence. Witnesses were interviewed. Homes were searched. Records were seized. Every new discovery generated additional questions. The authorities appeared determined to uncover every connection. Titus occasionally shared information gathered from clerks. Carefully, discreetly, political cases demanded caution. Even discussing them recklessly could attract unwanted attention. One evening, the cousins sat together outside the bakery after closing. The streets had grown quiet. A cool breeze drifted through the district. Titus lowered his voice. The government fears networks. Marcus frowned. What kind of networks? Groups of people acting together. The explanation seemed simple, yet it revealed something important. Rome possessed enormous power. Armies, courts, officials, taxes, roads, institutions stretching across continents. Yet even powerful states worried about organized opposition. History offered many examples. Rebellions, civil wars, military uprisings, political plots. Roman leaders remembered them all. That memory shaped their responses. As summer approached, hearings finally began. Crowds gathered daily. Many hoped for dramatic revelations. Most received lengthy testimony instead. Real investigations rarely resembled exciting stories. They involved documents, witnesses, contradictions, details, endless details. Marcus attended several sessions. The atmosphere differed from anything he had previously witnessed. Every statement seemed carefully examined, every relationship scrutinized. Prosecutors argued that certain writings encouraged resistance. Defenders insisted the accusations exaggerated harmless criticism. Witnesses disagreed with one another. Some appeared confident, others uncertain. Sorting truth from rumor proved difficult. Eventually, one fact emerged clearly. The alleged conspiracy was far smaller than originally feared. No armies waited outside the city. No violent uprising had been planned. Yet authorities remained concerned, because even minor challenges could grow if ignored. The verdicts reflected that concern. Several defendants received relatively modest punishments: fines, restrictions, monitoring. Others faced exile. Flavius himself avoided execution, but he lost property and was banished from Rome. The sentence devastated him. Everything familiar vanished. Friends, family, work, home. A lifetime of effort disappeared with a single judgment. Marcus watched the metalworker leave the city under guard. The sight remained with him for years. Execution ended life. Exile erased it. Both carried terrible consequences. Yet exile possessed a unique cruelty. The punished person continued living while losing nearly everything that gave life meaning. Many Romans feared it profoundly. Life gradually returned to normal. The conspiracy case faded into memory. New concerns replaced old ones. Harvests, taxes, business, family obligations. The ordinary rhythms of existence resumed. For nearly a year, nothing especially dramatic occurred. Then violence erupted. Not political violence, personal violence, and unlike the conspiracy investigation, this case left no uncertainty about whether a crime had occurred. The victim was dead. The body was discovered near a warehouse district shortly before dawn. A dock worker, middle-aged, known locally, well liked by many. The circumstances appeared straightforward. A fight, a knife, a fatal wound. Witnesses quickly identified a suspect, another laborer named Cassius. Both men had reportedly argued several times during previous months. Several people claimed to have heard threats. Others described ongoing hostility. The evidence seemed overwhelming. Authorities arrested Cassius almost immediately. Public opinion formed just as quickly. Most citizens assumed conviction was inevitable. Marcus was less certain. Experience had taught him caution. Appearances sometimes misled. Evidence mattered. Facts mattered. Investigations mattered. As proceedings unfolded, unexpected complications emerged. Witnesses disagreed regarding crucial details. Some placed Cassius near the scene. Others could not. One insisted he saw the attack. Another claimed darkness prevented identification. A supposed confession turned out to be unreliable. The certainty surrounding the case began weakening. Weeks later, an entirely different possibility emerged. The victim had apparently owed money to multiple individuals. Several possessed motives. Several lacked alibis. Suddenly, the case no longer appeared simple. Marcus attended portions of the trial whenever possible. The hearings demonstrated the challenges facing Roman courts. Modern people often imagine ancient justice as swift and careless. Sometimes it certainly was. Yet many investigations involved serious effort. Officials questioned witnesses repeatedly. Evidence was reviewed. Arguments continued for months. The process could be surprisingly thorough. Eventually, the truth emerged. Cassius had not committed the murder. Another man had. A debt dispute escalated into violence. The actual killer had attempted to direct suspicion elsewhere. For a time, he nearly succeeded. The revelation shocked many citizens. Public opinion reversed overnight. The wrongly accused laborer was released. The true offender faced judgment. The outcome reminded Marcus of his own experience years earlier. Innocence did not guarantee safety. Fortunately, in both cases, evidence ultimately prevailed. Not always, but sometimes, the convicted murderer received one of the harshest penalties Marcus had encountered firsthand. Unlike thieves, unlike fraudsters, unlike many political offenders, this crime involved deliberate killing. Roman law treated such acts seriously. The punishment reflected that seriousness. The execution attracted a large audience. Crowds gathered before sunrise. People arrived from distant neighborhoods. Some came out of curiosity. Others sought reassurance. Communities often desired visible justice following violent crimes. Marcus attended reluctantly. Part of him wished to understand. Part of him wished to stay away. The scene proved sobering. No celebration occurred. No festival atmosphere. The mood felt heavy. The condemned man appeared exhausted. Defeated, the sentence was carried out efficiently, without spectacle, without unnecessary delay. When it ended, the crowd dispersed quietly. The experience affected Marcus deeply, not because he questioned the man's guilt. The evidence had become overwhelming, rather because he witnessed the finality of state power. One judgment, one sentence, one life ended. Rome possessed many punishments: fines, flogging, exile, forced labor, imprisonment, property confiscation. Execution remained the most permanent. No appeal followed. No second opportunity. Nothing, only silence. As years continued passing, Marcus noticed an interesting pattern. Most citizens rarely encountered severe punishments directly. The vast majority never faced execution. Most never experienced exile. Many lived their entire lives without entering a courtroom. Yet the existence of punishments influenced everyone. That influence formed part of their purpose. People obeyed laws partly because they feared consequences. Even consequences they never personally witnessed. The legal system functioned as both reality and warning. One autumn afternoon, Titus arrived carrying troubling news. A shipment from the provinces had arrived containing prisoners, not ordinary criminals, bandits. Several had terrorized travelers along important roads. Robbery had become so frequent that merchants complained to provincial authorities. Military patrols eventually tracked the group down. The arrests generated considerable attention. Roads formed the lifelines of the empire. Safe travel enabled trade. Trade enabled prosperity. Banditry threatened both. Consequently, authorities intended to make an example of the captured men. Marcus listened carefully. Throughout his life, he had heard stories about highway robbers. Most sounded exaggerated. Travelers often embellished tales. Yet these prisoners appeared very real. And according to Titus, the punishments being considered would be severe enough to ensure that everyone across the region heard about them. Because when Rome decided to send a message to criminals, it preferred messages that could not easily be forgotten. The prisoners arrived under heavy guard. That fact alone revealed how seriously authorities viewed them. Ordinary thieves were often escorted by a handful of soldiers. These men traveled surrounded by armed escorts from the moment they entered the city. Chains rattled as they walked. Citizens stepped aside. Children stared openly. Shopkeepers abandoned their work long enough to watch the procession pass. Marcus happened to witness their arrival while delivering bread to a customer near one of Rome's main roads. The scene attracted immediate attention. People whispered, pointed, speculated. Some recognized the prisoners' names. Others merely recognized the reputation. The bandits had reportedly operated along several important routes connecting towns to the capital. Merchants feared them. Travelers dreaded them. According to reports, numerous robberies had occurred over several years. Some victims lost fortunes. Others lost their lives. The crimes extended far beyond simple theft. Violence accompanied many attacks. That detail greatly influenced public opinion. Had the bandits merely stolen property, sympathy might have existed among certain citizens. Rome contained many poor people. Many understood desperation. But stories involving murder changed everything. The public demanded punishment. Swift punishment. Visible punishment. The authorities appeared inclined to agree. Within days, hearings commenced. Unlike complicated corruption investigations or political cases, These proceedings moved quickly. Witnesses identified the accused. Recovered property linked them to crimes. Confessions emerged from several members of the group. The evidence accumulated rapidly. Few doubted the eventual outcome. Marcus attended one session alongside Titus. The room overflowed with spectators. Everyone wanted to see the men responsible for years of fear along the roads. The accused varied considerably. Some appeared hardened. Others looked surprisingly ordinary. One seemed barely older than 20. Another possessed gray hair. Looking at them, Marcus was reminded once again that criminals rarely resembled the monsters imagined in stories. Most looked like ordinary people who had made choices, sometimes terrible choices. The hearings concluded within weeks. The verdicts proved unsurprising. Guilty. Every principal member of the gang received conviction. Yet what attracted attention throughout Rome was not the verdict itself. It was the punishment. The authorities intended to make an example of them, not merely to punish past crimes, to discourage future ones. This distinction mattered greatly. Roman punishments often served multiple purposes simultaneously: justice, deterrence, public reassurance, political messaging, all intertwined. When the sentence became public, discussions erupted across the city. The principal leaders would face execution. Several lesser participants would receive forced labor. Others would spend years working in mines. The mines, even hearing those words, caused people to lower their voices. Marcus had heard about such sentences before, yet he had never spoken directly with anyone who experienced them. Forced labor in mines ranked among the harshest punishments available short of death. Conditions were notorious. Work proved exhausting. The environment dangerous. Life expectancy often short. Many considered it a slow death sentence. Unlike execution, which ended suffering quickly, the mines could stretch punishment across years. The state found such sentences useful. Labor extracted value from convicted criminals. At the same time, the harsh conditions discouraged others from similar behavior. Several days after the verdict, Marcus discussed the matter with an elderly customer who had once worked in Spain. The man described mining operations he had seen decades earlier. Dark tunnels, relentless labor, dangerous collapses, poor air, constant exhaustion. His description left little doubt why the punishment inspired fear. Not everyone sentenced to the mines survived long. The customer paused before adding something Marcus never forgot. Some punishments end life. He looked toward the street. Others make people wish it had ended. The observation lingered long after the conversation ended. Weeks later, public attention shifted toward another matter. This one involved a wealthy family. The contrast fascinated Marcus. Rome's legal system constantly revealed differences between social classes. The accused was the son of a prominent merchant. Young, educated, connected, his crime involved fraud, specifically forged contracts and financial deception. Large sums of money had changed hands. Investors suffered losses. Business partners demanded accountability. The case quickly became famous, not because fraud was unusual, because the defendant belonged to an influential family. Citizens watched closely to see whether privilege would alter the outcome. Such questions emerged frequently in Rome. Officially, the law applied broadly. Reality often proved more complicated. Marcus followed developments through Titus. The hearings stretched over months. Advocates argued passionately. Documents filled entire rooms. Witnesses appeared endlessly. The complexity exceeded anything Marcus had previously encountered. Eventually, a verdict arrived. Guilty, yet once again, the punishment differed from those imposed upon common criminals. No mines, no public flogging, no execution. Instead, the young man lost enormous amounts of property. His family paid substantial penalties. His reputation collapsed. His future prospects vanished. The punishment damaged him financially and socially. Whether it matched the severity of sentences imposed upon poorer citizens remained a matter of debate. Citizens argued about it for weeks. Some considered the outcome fair. Others disagreed strongly. Marcus increasingly realized that discussions about justice rarely disappeared. Every generation argued about fairness. Every generation questioned punishments. Every generation struggled to balance order and mercy. Rome was no different. As another winter approached, a new challenge confronted the city. Food shortages. Not a complete famine. Nothing so dramatic. Yet grain shipments arrived later than expected. Prices rose. Anxiety spread. The memory of previous shortages remained fresh in many minds. Rome depended heavily upon imported grain. Any disruption created concern. The authorities monitored the situation carefully. Large cities could become dangerous when food grew scarce. Hungry populations often became angry populations, and angry populations sometimes became violent populations. The state understood this very well. Additional grain shipments eventually arrived. The immediate crisis passed. Yet during the period of uncertainty, several incidents occurred. Warehouse thefts increased. Arguments broke out in markets. A few small riots erupted near distribution centers. Most were quickly controlled. One incident, however, attracted significant attention. A group of men attempted to seize grain from a storage facility. The effort failed. Guards intervened before serious damage occurred. The participants were arrested. Public reaction proved complicated. Some citizens condemned them as criminals. Others sympathized. After all, hunger could drive desperate decisions. Roman authorities faced a difficult problem. How should the law treat crimes motivated by need? The question was ancient and difficult. The eventual punishments reflected that complexity. The leaders of the group received serious penalties. Those who organized the attempt bore the greatest responsibility. Several followers received lighter sentences. Officials appeared determined to restore order without creating unnecessary resentment. The balancing act revealed a practical side of Roman governance, often overlooked. Punishment alone could not solve every problem. Authorities also needed stability. A sentence that angered thousands could create new troubles. Good administrators understood this. The incident gradually faded from memory. Life continued. The bakery remained busy. Marcus grew older. Gray hairs appeared occasionally. His parents slowed noticeably. Younger workers joined the business. Years passed with surprising speed. Then, during one spring unlike any before it, news arrived from the provinces. A rebellion, not near Rome, far away, yet significant enough to dominate conversations throughout the empire. At first, details remained vague. Reports conflicted. Travelers carried incomplete information. Officials released few statements. But one fact became increasingly clear. The government viewed the situation seriously. Soldiers were mobilized. Resources gathered. Messages rushed between provincial governors. Marcus had witnessed many crimes, many punishments, yet rebellion occupied an entirely different category. A thief stole property. A murderer killed an individual. A rebel challenged the state itself. The consequences could affect entire regions, entire populations, entire armies. And history suggested that when Rome confronted rebellion, the punishments imposed afterward often ranked among the harshest the empire could deliver. As reports continued arriving from the frontier, citizens across Rome began wondering the same thing. Not whether the rebellion would be crushed. Most assumed it would. The real question concerned what would happen afterward, because victory was only one part of Rome's response. The punishments that followed often became lessons remembered for generations. News of the rebellion reached Rome like a slow-moving storm. At first it arrived in fragments. A merchant mentioned unrest near a provincial town. A soldier passing through the city spoke of broken supply lines. A government clerk hinted at serious resistance in distant territories. None of it was fully clear, yet together the pieces formed a disturbing picture. Something large was happening beyond Rome's immediate control. Marcus first understood the scale when Titus arrived one evening with unusually serious expression. No casual remarks, no humor, only information. "The rebellion is real," he said quietly. Marcus set down a loaf of bread he had been wrapping. "How serious?" Titus exhaled. "Serious enough that legions have been sent." That answer changed everything. Rome did not send legions. for minor disturbances. Legions meant war-level attention. Marcus felt a familiar unease return. He had seen enough of Roman justice to understand what followed large-scale conflict. Victory was only the beginning. After victory came consequences. As weeks passed, rumors multiplied. Entire communities in the provinces were said to be resisting Roman authority. Tax collectors had been attacked, officials driven out, small military detachments ambushed. The situation escalated rapidly. Rome responded as it always did, decisively, methodically, and with overwhelming force. Eventually, official reports confirmed what many already suspected. The rebellion had been crushed completely, decisively. The commander leading the campaign sent detailed accounts back to the capital, lists of captured leaders, reports of destroyed strongholds, descriptions of battles that ended quickly once Roman forces fully engaged. For the citizens of Rome, the victory itself was not surprising. What came next mattered more, because Rome had a long memory for rebellion and even longer traditions regarding punishment. Marcus noticed a shift in atmosphere across the city. People spoke more cautiously, not out of fear of the rebellion itself, but out of anticipation. Everyone knew that once the dust settled, consequences would follow, not just for those directly involved, but for entire communities associated with resistance. Titus explained it one evening while reviewing records. Rome does not only punish individuals, he said. Marcus frowned. What else? Examples, Titus replied. That single word carried weight. Examples meant public demonstrations, visible consequences, actions designed to be remembered, not just by those present, but by those who heard about them afterward. Weeks later, the first prisoners arrived in Rome. They did not come alone. They came in groups, bound, exhausted, guarded heavily. Among them were former soldiers who had joined the rebellion, local leaders, messengers, and ordinary participants who had simply followed events as they unfolded. The variety shocked Marcus. It reminded him again that large conflicts rarely involved simple categories of good and evil. Most people were somewhere in between, following orders, following fear, following hope, following survival. The hearings that followed were different from earlier trials Marcus had witnessed. There was less uncertainty, less debate, more focus on classification. Who led, who followed, who organized, who resisted, who surrendered. The legal process felt less like discovery and more like sorting. One afternoon, Marcus attended a session where a captured rebel leader was questioned. The man stood upright despite chains. His face showed exhaustion, but also defiance. The prosecutor read charges: treason, armed rebellion, endangering Roman citizens. The list continued. The accused listened without interruption when given opportunity to speak. He did not deny participation. Instead, he offered justification. He spoke of taxes, of local hardship, of grievances that had accumulated over years. Some in the crowd shifted uncomfortably. Others remained expressionless. Rome allowed such speeches, but speeches rarely changed outcomes in cases involving rebellion. The verdict was predictable: guilty. The sentence, however, carried the real message: execution for leaders, forced labor for many participants, confiscation of property, and for certain regions associated with the uprising, additional penalties imposed collectively. Marcus had heard of collective punishments before, but seeing them discussed openly felt different. It meant consequences extended beyond those physically present in court, beyond individuals, into communities, even generations in some cases. Titus later explained it in simpler terms. If Rome believes a region cannot be trusted, he said, it makes trust expensive to regain. Marcus understood what that implied. Trust in Rome was not automatic. It was maintained through order, through expectation, and sometimes through fear. As the legal process continued, another aspect of Roman punishment became visible. Public display, executions were not always private affairs. In certain cases, they were deliberately made visible, carried out in spaces where citizens could observe, not for entertainment alone, but as warning, a reminder. Marcus attended one such event reluctantly. The condemned were marched through a controlled route, not rushed, not hidden, visible to those who gathered along the streets. The atmosphere was different from ordinary public events. No celebration, no laughter, only tension. Even those who believed punishment necessary seemed subdued. When the sentence was carried out, silence followed. The crowd did not linger long afterward. People dispersed quickly, returning to their lives, as if distance could soften what they had just witnessed. Marcus walked home slowly that evening. He did not speak much. Neither did Titus. The experience reinforced something he had been gradually learning for years. Roman punishment was not random. It was structured, layered, designed with multiple purposes in mind: justice, control, deterrence, stability, and memory. The empire did not simply punish to respond to crime. It punished to shape behavior, to influence decisions made by those who had not yet been caught. In the following months, life in Rome gradually stabilized again. Rebellion faded from daily conversation. New concerns emerged. Trade resumed. Markets reopened fully. Prices adjusted. The rhythm of the city returned. Marcus found himself reflecting more often on everything he had witnessed since his early arrest years ago. From petty theft to corruption, from murder to fraud, from exile to execution, from individual crime to political rebellion. Each category carried its own logic, its own consequences, its own form of punishment. Yet beneath all of it lay a consistent principle. Rome punished not only to respond, but to maintain itself. The empire was vast, complex, constantly dependent on order. Without enforcement, it would fracture. Without consequences, laws would weaken. And without fear of punishment, many believed society itself would collapse into disorder. Marcus did not fully agree with everything he had seen, but he understood the reasoning. One evening, sitting outside the bakery as the sun set over Rome, Titus asked him a question. After everything you've seen, what do you think punishment is for? Marcus considered for a long moment, not quickly answering, because the answer was no longer simple. Finally he spoke. Control, he said quietly. Titus nodded slightly. Sometimes, he replied. Marcus looked toward the distant city lights. And sometimes, Titus paused. Sometimes, he said. It's just what remains after everything else fails. The conversation ended there, but the thought stayed, because by then, Marcus had learned something Rome rarely admitted openly. Punishment was never just about criminals. It was about everything surrounding them. Fear, order, power, and the fragile balance that kept a vast empire from falling into chaos. And somewhere in that balance, every citizen lived under the shadow of consequences they might never personally face, yet could never fully ignore. Years passed again, but Rome did not become simpler. If anything, Marcus realized, it became more layered the longer he observed it. New laws were added. Old practices were adjusted. Officials changed. Emperors came and went. Yet the machinery of punishment remained steady beneath all of it, unmoving in its purpose, evolving only in method. Marcus, by now, was no longer the young baker who had once walked into a bronze worker's workshop and stumbled upon a dead body. He was older, quieter, more attentive to details others ignored. The bakery still stood near the Tiber district, but its ownership had gradually shifted into Marcus's full responsibility after his father's death. His mother lived in a smaller room behind the shop. His daily routine remained similar, yet his mind no longer stayed within the boundaries of bread and customers. He saw patterns now, connections, echoes between events that once felt unrelated. Titus, still working within administrative circles, occasionally brought news from the courts. But even without him, Marcus could now sense when something important was unfolding in the city. That morning, the atmosphere felt different, subtle at first, then increasingly noticeable. Soldiers moved more frequently through key streets, not in panic, not in urgency, but in coordination. Brothers fought brothers, like something carefully prepared. By midday, whispers confirmed what Marcus had already begun suspecting. A major trial was underway. Not rebellion this time, not bandits, not corruption, something more politically sensitive. A senator accused of treasonous intent. The word alone carried enough weight to silence conversations. Marcus had heard it before, but never applied to someone so high in Rome's structure. Senators were not ordinary citizens. They were part of the system itself. To accuse one of treason was to suggest cracks within the foundation of power. Titus arrived later that afternoon, confirming the situation. "It's serious," he said quietly. Marcus nodded. "Conviction likely." Titus hesitated. "That depends on what they prove and what they choose to believe." That distinction had always existed in Roman justice. Proof mattered, but interpretation mattered just as much. The trial attracted enormous attention. Citizens gathered not only outside the court, but throughout surrounding streets. Even those who normally avoided legal matters found themselves drawn into it. The idea of a senator standing, accused of betraying Rome, blurred the usual boundaries between power and accountability. Inside the court, proceedings stretched for days. Marcus attended when possible. The accused senator, Lucius Varro, maintained composure throughout. Unlike lower status defendants, he was not treated roughly. He was not chained in public. He was allowed advocates, allowed preparation, allowed speech. That difference alone spoke volumes about Roman hierarchy. Witnesses came forward, some cautiously supportive, others sharply critical. Documents were presented, letters examined, financial records reviewed. The accusation centered around alleged communications with external factions and suspected attempts to influence provincial decisions outside authorized channels. Nothing dramatic on the surface, but politically sensitive enough to trigger full investigation. Marcus noticed something important during the hearings. Unlike earlier cases he had witnessed, this one was not about immediate violence or clear criminal acts. It was about intention, interpretation, possibility, what someone might have planned or might have implied. Roman law, in matters of politics, often operated in this uncertain space. Days passed, arguments intensified, public opinion remained divided. Some citizens believed the senator was being used as an example. Others believed the evidence genuinely pointed toward wrongdoing. Few felt certain. Then, unexpectedly, the verdict arrived. Guilty. The announcement spread through the court like a shockwave. Even those expecting conviction reacted with visible surprise. But what followed mattered more. The punishment was not immediate execution, not exile, not confiscation alone. Instead, a combination: removal from office, seizure of property, permanent exclusion from political life, and exile from Rome itself. The senator stood silently as the sentence was read. No protest, No visible collapse, only stillness, as though he had already accepted the outcome long before it was spoken. Marcus left the court with Titus afterward. Neither spoke for a while. Eventually, Marcus asked, "Was it justice?" Titus did not answer immediately. That hesitation itself was meaningful. "Justice is what the system produces," he said finally. Marcus frowned. "That doesn't answer my question." Titus glanced at him. "I know." The conversation ended there, but Marcus carried it with him, because by now he understood something uncomfortable. Roman punishment was not always about truth in the simple sense. It was about outcomes, stability, political balance, and perception. Weeks later, another case emerged involving a group of soldiers accused of unauthorized actions during a minor provincial conflict. Unlike previous military cases Marcus had heard about, this one did not involve desertion or cowardice. It involved excessive force. Reports suggested villages had been punished harshly during operations. Some accounts described destruction beyond what commanders had ordered. The investigation focused on responsibility. Who gave orders? Who followed them? Who exceeded authority? The hearings revealed something Marcus had begun to notice more often in later years. Punishment within Rome's system was not limited to criminals. It extended upward as well. Soldiers, officers, administrators, even high-ranking officials could face consequences when actions crossed certain lines. But again, the nature of punishment varied. Lower ranks faced harsher physical penalties. Higher ranks faced political and social consequences. Demotion, dismissal, exile, reputation loss. Each level of society experienced punishment differently, not equally. Marcus no longer viewed this as surprising, only as consistent with everything he had seen. One evening, as autumn winds returned to the city, Marcus and Titus sat near the river again. The water moved slowly, reflecting the fading light. Rome behind them remained alive with noise, but here at the edge, it felt distant. Titus broke the silence. "You've seen a lot now." Marcus nodded. "More than I ever wanted to." Titus gave a faint smile. "And what do you think Rome is now?" Marcus did not answer immediately. He watched the river for a long moment, then finally spoke. "It's not just a city," he said. "It's a system of consequences." Titus leaned back slightly. "That's one way to see it." Marcus added quietly, "And everyone lives inside it." Titus said nothing in response, because there was nothing simple to add. The river continued flowing, unchanged, unbothered by courts, by trials, by punishments. But Rome never stopped adjusting, never stopped reacting, never stopped deciding what to do with those who broke its rules. And somewhere within that endless cycle, Marcus finally understood the truth he had been circling for years. Punishment in Rome was never a single idea. It was a language, and the empire spoke it constantly. The years continued their steady march forward. Marcus often thought that time resembled the Tiber River. No matter how closely someone watched it, the water never paused. It simply carried everything onward. People, empires, memories, and eventually, even the most dramatic events faded into history. Yet Rome remained restless. A city of nearly endless activity could never remain quiet for long. Every season brought fresh disputes, fresh accusations, fresh examples of the law at work. Marcus had now spent decades observing the machinery of Roman justice from the perspective of an ordinary citizen, not a magistrate, not a senator, not a soldier, simply a man whose life had once been altered by a wrongful suspicion, and who thereafter paid closer attention than most. That attention would soon lead him to one of the most disturbing cases he had ever encountered. It began with a disappearance. A child, 9 years old, the son of a textile merchant. The boy vanished while running errands near a crowded marketplace. At first, nobody panicked. Children occasionally wandered. Sometimes they became distracted. Sometimes they followed friends. Usually, they returned home within hours. This time, they did not. The family searched. Neighbors joined them. Shopkeepers were questioned. Street vendors were asked if they had seen anything unusual. As daylight faded, concern began replacing optimism. By the following morning, fear had spread throughout the district. The authorities became involved. Search parties combed nearby neighborhoods. Questions multiplied. The city suddenly felt less safe. Parents kept children closer. People watched strangers more carefully. Marcus noticed the change immediately. Anxiety moved through the streets like an invisible fog. Everyone seemed uneasy because crimes against children touched something deeper than ordinary criminal acts. Even hardened citizens reacted differently. 3 days later, the situation grew worse. Evidence suggested the disappearance was not accidental. Witnesses reported seeing the boy speaking with an unfamiliar man shortly before vanishing. Descriptions were collected. Investigators worked rapidly. Pressure mounted. The merchant family possessed connections. Officials wanted answers. The public wanted answers. Rome itself seemed to demand answers. Eventually, a suspect emerged, a laborer who had recently arrived from another region. Several witnesses identified him. Others reported suspicious behavior. The arrest occurred quickly. News spread even faster. Crowds gathered outside the holding facility. People shouted, demanded punishment, demanded certainty. Marcus recognized the danger immediately. When fear combined with anger, reason often suffered. The investigation, nevertheless, continued. Days became weeks. The suspect denied involvement. Repeatedly, consistently, no confession emerged. No clear evidence appeared, yet public hostility intensified. Many citizens had already decided the outcome. Facts seemed secondary. The situation reminded Marcus painfully of his own experience years earlier. Only this time emotions were far stronger. The missing child was eventually found, dead. The discovery shocked the city. Even Rome, a place accustomed to violence, reacted with horror. Business slowed. Conversations grew somber. The mood darkened noticeably. The authorities now faced enormous pressure. Whoever committed the crime had to be found, punished, displayed as proof that justice still functioned. The investigation became relentless. Additional witnesses appeared. New evidence surfaced. Eventually, the case against the suspect strengthened considerably. Items connected to the victim were discovered among his possessions. Testimony aligned more consistently. The legal proceedings moved forward. Marcus attended part of the trial. The atmosphere differed from anything he had previously witnessed. No one questioned whether punishment should occur. The only question involved determining guilt. Once guilt seemed established, the crowd's focus shifted entirely toward the sentence. The verdict arrived after weeks of hearings. Guilty. The reaction was immediate. Many citizens expressed relief. Others expressed satisfaction. Marcus felt neither, only sadness, because even justified punishment could not restore what had been lost. The sentence was severe, among the harshest available. Authorities intended to demonstrate that certain crimes crossed boundaries beyond tolerance. The punishment served justice, but it also served symbolism. Rome wanted the public to see that vulnerable victims received protection, that some acts would meet overwhelming consequences. Afterward, the city slowly recovered. Parents relaxed slightly. Markets resumed normal activity. Life continued. Yet Marcus noticed something. Cases involving children lingered longer in memory than most crimes. Years later, people still referenced the incident, not because it was unique, because it struck at fundamental fears. The law could punish, but punishment could never fully erase grief. That lesson stayed with him. As another decade approached, Marcus entered middle age. His hair had grown noticeably gray. His movements slowed slightly. Younger bakers now handled many daily tasks. The city around him also changed. New buildings appeared. Old ones disappeared. Political leaders changed. Administrative priorities shifted. Yet the courts remained busy. The prisons remained occupied. The cycle continued. One spring, a particularly unusual case captured public attention. Unlike murders or thefts, it involved false accusations. A wealthy merchant claimed that a business rival had forged documents and stolen property. The allegations were serious. Severe penalties seemed possible. The accused man faced financial ruin, social disgrace, perhaps imprisonment. The investigation proceeded. Witnesses testified. Records were examined. At first, the evidence appeared convincing, very convincing. Then small inconsistencies emerged. A date that did not align, a signature that seemed unusual, a witness whose story changed repeatedly. Slowly, the truth surfaced. The accusations themselves were fraudulent. The merchant had fabricated evidence, manufactured witnesses, constructed an entire case in an attempt to destroy a competitor. The revelation stunned observers. Many had assumed guilt from the beginning. Now everything reversed. The accuser became the accused. The accused became the victim. Marcus found the situation fascinating, not because of the deception itself, but because it revealed another function of Roman punishment, protecting the legal process. False accusations threatened more than individuals. They threatened confidence in the courts. If evidence could be fabricated without consequence, the entire system weakened. Authorities understood this. The punishment imposed upon the merchant reflected that concern. Heavy financial penalties, loss of reputation, restrictions on future commercial activities. The sentence sent a clear message. Manipulating justice carried risks of its own. Marcus discussed the matter with Titus afterward. The old clerk listened carefully before offering an observation. Most people think punishment exists because laws exist. Marcus nodded. Isn't that true? Partly. Titus smiled faintly. But laws also exist because punishment exists. Marcus considered the statement. It sounded circular, yet somehow accurate. A law without enforcement was merely a suggestion. A punishment without law was merely violence. Rome relied upon both. Each gave meaning to the other. Years earlier, Marcus would not have understood that distinction. Now he did, and the more he observed, the more complicated justice appeared. Not simpler, never simpler. The city often demanded certainty. Reality rarely provided it. The courts sought order. Human behavior produced disorder. Punishments attempted to bridge that gap, sometimes successfully, sometimes imperfectly, always visibly. As another summer approached, news arrived from the southern provinces involving a series of large-scale tax, fraud investigations. The amounts involved were enormous. Officials were implicated. Merchants were implicated. Even local administrators appeared connected. The scandal promised to become one of the largest financial cases Marcus had ever heard about. And unlike ordinary theft, it threatened something Rome guarded fiercely: the flow of revenue that kept the empire functioning. Because armies required payment, roads required maintenance, officials required salaries. The empire ran on taxes, and anyone accused of interfering with that system soon discovered just how seriously Rome protected the foundations of its power. The tax scandal arrived in Rome not as a single revelation, but but as a steady stream of disturbing discoveries. At first, officials believed the problem was limited to one province. Then investigators uncovered similar irregularities elsewhere. Records did not match collections. Expected revenues never arrived. Amounts reported by local administrators differed from figures held in central archives. What initially appeared to be negligence soon looked like something far more deliberate. Fraud, large-scale fraud. Marcus first heard detailed information from Titus, who arrived at the bakery carrying more tablets than usual. That alone suggested the seriousness of the situation. The older clerk sat heavily at a table near the ovens. For a few moments, he simply rubbed his eyes. Then he spoke. "It is worse than anyone thought." Marcus poured him water. "How much money?" Titus laughed without humor. "So much that people have stopped discussing numbers." That answer said enough. Throughout the empire, taxes formed the foundation of government. The grain supply depended upon them. The roads depended upon them. The army depended upon them. Even the courts depended upon them. Rome could tolerate many problems. Threats to revenue attracted immediate attention. The investigation expanded rapidly. Auditors traveled between provinces. Records were seized. Warehouses inspected. Officials questioned. For months, the empire seemed obsessed with accounting. An ordinary citizen might find such matters dull. Marcus did not. Years of watching, the legal system had taught him something important. Sometimes the most dangerous crimes involved no bloodshed at all. No murders, no robberies, no dramatic violence, only numbers written on wax tablets. Yet those numbers could influence millions of lives. The hearings eventually began. Several accused officials were brought to Rome. Others faced proceedings in provincial courts. The complexity proved enormous. Witnesses described falsified records. Merchants explained suspicious transactions. Clerks testified regarding altered accounts. Piece by piece, investigators reconstructed the scheme. The fraud had operated for years. Money disappeared at multiple levels. Some participants became wealthy. Others merely followed instructions. The network extended farther than anyone expected. Marcus attended several sessions. Unlike murder trials, these hearings attracted fewer spectators. Financial crimes lacked excitement, yet the consequences proved substantial. When verdicts finally arrived, punishments varied according to involvement. Some defendants paid crushing fines. Others lost property. Several were exiled. A handful received prison sentences. The leaders faced the harshest consequences. Rome intended to demonstrate that corruption within government structures would not be ignored. The message traveled quickly across provinces, across administrative offices, across the empire itself. Marcus noticed something familiar. Once again, punishment served two audiences. The guilty and everyone else. That pattern appeared repeatedly throughout Roman history. The law addressed individual actions. The punishment addressed society. Shortly after the scandal concluded, another matter drew public attention. This one involved the army. Not rebellion, not desertion, something rarer. A commander accused of incompetence. The distinction surprised Marcus. Most military cases he had heard involved disobedience or cowardice. This situation differed. A campaign had ended disastrously. Supplies were lost. Soldiers died unnecessarily. Important objectives failed. The commander insisted circumstances were beyond his control. Critics disagreed. The debate quickly became political. How much responsibility should a leader bear for failure? The question resonated throughout Rome because it extended beyond the military. Merchants asked it. Administrators asked it. Families asked it. When things went wrong, who deserved blame? The hearings stretched for months. Evidence filled countless records. Surviving officers testified. Maps were examined. Orders reviewed. Marcus followed developments with interest. The outcome eventually surprised many observers. The commander was not convicted of treason, not convicted of deliberate wrongdoing. Instead, he was removed from command and barred from holding similar authority in the future. His career ended. His reputation suffered. His influence vanished. The punishment reflected Rome's ability to distinguish between failure and betrayal. Not always perfectly, but sometimes Marcus found that distinction reassuring. Not every mistake became a crime. Not every disaster resulted in execution. The system, for all its flaws, possessed nuance, at least occasionally. By now, Marcus had spent nearly 2 decades observing Roman justice. The experience changed him. When younger, he had viewed punishment as something simple. A person broke a law. A penalty followed. Reality proved far more complicated. Context mattered. Status mattered. Intent mattered. Politics mattered. Public opinion mattered. Every case seemed to contain layers beneath the surface. One autumn afternoon, a young apprentice working at the bakery asked Marcus a question. The boy could not have been older than 16. Have you ever known someone punished unfairly? Marcus paused. The answer arrived immediately. Himself, yet many others, came to mind as well. People wrongly accused. People judged hastily. People caught in circumstances beyond their control. At the same time, he remembered genuine criminals, dangerous individuals, violent individuals, people whose punishment protected others. The question resisted simple answers. Finally, he replied. Sometimes the apprentice nodded, and fairly. Marcus smiled faintly. Sometimes the young man frowned. That doesn't explain much. No, Marcus admitted. It doesn't. The conversation ended there. Yet Marcus continued thinking about it long afterward. Perhaps because the older he became, the less certain he felt about absolute judgments. Life revealed complexity. The law attempted to simplify it. Success varied. Years passed once more. Rome changed emperors. New officials arrived. Old officials disappeared. The city continued expanding and evolving. Marcus entered late middle age. Titus's hair turned completely white. The bakery employed workers who had not even been born. When Marcus first found Lucius's body decades earlier, time transformed everything, except perhaps human nature. The crimes remained familiar. The motivations remained familiar. Greed, fear, anger, ambition, desperation. The names changed. The patterns endured. Then, during one particularly cold winter, a case emerged that seemed to contain all those motivations at once. A wealthy widow had died unexpectedly. Initially, no one suspected wrongdoing. The woman was elderly. Her health had declined. Death seemed natural. Then questions arose regarding her will. Family members disputed its authenticity. Servants reported unusual events before her death. Neighbors recalled arguments. Physicians expressed uncertainty. The situation quickly escalated into a major investigation. At first, authorities focused upon inheritance. Then evidence suggested possible poisoning. That possibility transformed everything. Poison occupied a special place in Roman imagination. People feared it deeply. Unlike open violence, poison worked invisibly. Secretly, a victim might never see the attack coming. Rumors spread rapidly. Several relatives became suspects. Servants became suspects. Business associates became suspects. Everyone connected to the widow suddenly faced scrutiny. The investigation consumed months. Witnesses contradicted one another. Experts disagreed. Documents created confusion. The complexity fascinated the public. Rome loved mysteries almost as much as it loved certainty. Eventually, a startling conclusion emerged. The widow had indeed been poisoned, not by one individual, by a conspiracy involving multiple family members seeking inheritance. The revelation shocked even experienced officials. Greed had united people who otherwise disliked one another. The trial that followed attracted enormous attention. Crowds filled every available space. People wanted answers. People wanted accountability. And above all, people wanted to know how Rome would punish those who murdered for profit. Because murder alone was serious. Murder motivated by inheritance and deception struck many citizens as especially repulsive. The eventual sentences would become some of the most discussed punishments in Rome for years afterward. And Marcus, now older and far wiser than the frightened young baker he once was, would witness another powerful example of how Roman justice responded. when crime emerged not from desperation or passion, but from calculated greed. The poisoning trial dominated conversation throughout Rome for months. Even people who normally ignored legal matters followed every development. Part of the fascination came from the victim herself. The widow had been wealthy, respected, connected to several influential families. But the greater fascination came from the nature of the crime. Romans understood theft. They understood anger. They understood violence committed during arguments or drunken disputes. Poison felt different. It suggested planning, patience, calculation. A person could not poison another in a moment of sudden rage. The act required preparation, and preparation made many citizens uncomfortable. Marcus attended several days of testimony. The proceedings were crowded from sunrise onward. People packed hallways. Vendors sold food outside. Rumors spread through the waiting crowds long before witnesses ever spoke. Inside the hearing chamber, officials worked carefully. The case was complex. Several relatives stood accused. A former household servant testified. A physician testified. Business associates testified. Even neighbors found themselves called upon to answer questions. The investigation had uncovered a web of relationships tied together by one thing: money, a great deal of money. Inheritance often produced conflict in Rome. Families argued over property. Children challenged parents. Relatives who rarely visited suddenly appeared when estates became available. Such disputes were common. Murder was not. The evidence gradually became impossible to ignore. Witnesses described secret meetings. Financial records revealed unusual transactions. Messages connected key suspects to one another. No single piece of evidence proved everything. Together, they formed a compelling picture. By the time verdicts arrived, few people seemed surprised. The principal conspirators were found guilty. The punishments reflected the seriousness of both the crime and the social status of those involved. Property seizures, exile for the most responsible individuals, execution. The sentences sparked debate throughout the city. Some citizens approved completely. Others argued that wealthier offenders often escaped harsher treatment given to poorer criminals. The argument was not new. Marcus had heard versions of it for decades. The law claimed consistency. Human beings noticed exceptions. That tension never disappeared. After the trial ended, Rome gradually moved on. As it always did, the city possessed an endless appetite for new stories. Soon another event replaced the poisoning case in public conversation. This one involved the arena. Not gladiators, not public games. A crime committed during a festival. The victim was a local merchant. The accused, a group of young men from wealthy families. Witnesses described excessive drinking, an argument, escalating violence. The circumstances embarrassed many influential people because once again, social status complicated matters. Marcus followed the proceedings through Titus. The case attracted enormous attention precisely because it tested a recurring question. Would privileged citizens face meaningful consequences, or would influence shield them? The hearings stretched for weeks. Numerous witnesses appeared. Some attempted to minimize the violence. Others described events far more seriously. Eventually, the truth emerged. The merchant had been badly beaten after a minor disagreement. His injuries later proved fatal. The accused could not deny involvement. Too many people had witnessed the attack. The verdicts were guilty. The punishments proved substantial. Several defendants lost family wealth. Several were exiled. Others faced periods of imprisonment and forced labor. The outcome reassured some citizens, not because punishment erased the crime, because it demonstrated that even influential families occasionally encountered limits. Marcus reflected upon that point often. Rome was unequal in many ways. No honest observer could deny it. Yet complete immunity remained rare. The state ultimately protected itself above all else. Even powerful individuals could become expendable if public confidence required it. Years continued slipping by. The bakery prospered. Younger workers increasingly managed daily operations. Marcus spent less time carrying deliveries and more time supervising. His body appreciated the change. His knees often reminded him of his age. His back occasionally protested long hours. The city around him seemed younger than ever. New generations filled the streets. Children who had once purchased bread from him now brought their own children. Time worked quietly, yet relentlessly. One spring morning, Titus arrived carrying troubling news. Bandit activity had increased again in several provinces. Trade routes suffered disruptions. Merchants complained loudly. Travelers reported attacks. The government responded predictably. Additional patrols, additional investigations, additional arrests. Marcus immediately remembered the bandits from years earlier. The men sent to execution and the mines. Apparently, the lesson had not lasted forever. Few lessons ever did. Human beings possessed remarkable ability to repeat mistakes. The authorities eventually captured another network of robbers. Unlike earlier groups, these criminals focused heavily upon extortion. They demanded payment from villages, threatened violence, controlled stretches of road. In effect, they attempted to create their own miniature authority. Rome disliked competition, especially when it involved force. The trials moved rapidly. The evidence proved overwhelming. Witnesses eagerly testified. Victims wanted protection. Communities wanted security restored. The punishments reflected those desires. Leaders faced execution. Others received sentences involving forced labor. Some younger participants received lesser penalties after demonstrating limited involvement. Marcus noticed a recurring pattern. Roman justice could be harsh, yet it frequently distinguished between leaders and followers. Responsibility mattered, at least in many cases. Not always, but often enough to be noticeable. A few years later, another issue emerged: counterfeiting. Again, the crime seemed impossible to eliminate entirely. As long as money existed, someone attempted to imitate it. This particular operation proved unusually sophisticated. Investigators discovered workshops producing convincing copies of official coinage. The scale alarmed authorities. Counterfeit currency threatened trust. Without trust, commerce suffered. Without commerce, the empire suffered. The logic remained straightforward. The resulting investigation stretched across multiple regions. Arrests followed. Confessions followed. Trials followed. The cycle felt familiar by now. Marcus almost smiled at the predictability. Different crimes, different names, same process: accusation, investigation, judgment, punishment. Yet one detail stood out. The counterfeiting network included several former officials, individuals once trusted by the state. That betrayal intensified public anger. Citizens generally expected criminals to break laws. They expected officials to enforce them. The contradiction felt especially offensive. Consequently, the punishments proved severe. Authorities wanted to restore confidence. Visible consequences helped achieve that goal. By now, Marcus had become something of an unofficial storyteller within the bakery. Younger workers frequently asked questions about old cases, old scandals, old punishments. Many listened with fascination. To them, these stories felt like distant history. To Marcus, they remained vivid memories. One evening, a young apprentice asked a question that made him pause. What punishment scared Romans the most? The bakery grew quiet. Several workers waited for the answer. Marcus considered carefully. Over the decades, he had seen many forms of punishment. Execution frightened people. Certainly, the mines frightened people. Exile frightened people. Flogging frightened people. Yet none felt like the complete answer. Finally, he spoke. Being forgotten, the apprentices exchanged confused looks. Marcus smiled. In Rome, status mattered. Reputation mattered. Family mattered. He looked around the room. Many people feared losing those things more than pain. The workers considered the idea. Some seemed unconvinced. Others nodded slowly. Marcus understood why. Age changes perspective. Young people often fear physical suffering. Older people often fear losing everything they spent a lifetime building. Rome understood that distinction remarkably well, which explained why so many punishments targeted reputation, property, influence, and legacy, alongside the body itself. As another year approached, Titus brought news of a case unlike any Marcus had previously encountered. The accusations involved judges, actual judges, men responsible for deciding the fate of others, now accused of accepting bribes. The irony fascinated the entire city, because when the guardians of justice themselves became suspects, Rome faced a uniquely dangerous problem. Not merely corruption, but the possibility that citizens might stop believing in the legal system altogether. And for an empire built upon laws, courts, and authority, few threats proved more unsettling than that. The allegations against the judges spread through Rome faster than almost any scandal Marcus could remember. People expected merchants to cheat. They expected thieves to steal. They expected politicians to pursue influence. But judges occupied a different place in the public imagination. Whether citizens loved the courts or hated them, most wanted to believe that judgments emerged from something larger than personal profit. The idea that judges themselves might be selling decisions disturbed people deeply. Marcus first noticed the impact while opening the bakery one morning. Customers arrived earlier than usual, not because they needed bread, because they wanted information. Everyone had heard a version of the story. Few knew the details. One customer claimed a judge had accepted gold from wealthy merchants. Another insisted entire verdicts had been purchased. A third argued the accusations were politically motivated. The truth remained unclear, yet public confidence had already suffered. Titus later confirmed that formal investigations were underway. Several judges had been suspended. Records were being examined, past rulings reviewed, witnesses questioned. The authorities understood the danger. A corrupt merchant damaged commerce. A corrupt judge damaged trust itself. The distinction mattered enormously. Weeks passed. The investigation expanded. Soon, evidence began emerging. Financial transactions, unexplained wealth, testimony from intermediaries who allegedly delivered payments. The picture gradually became clearer. Not every accused judge proved guilty. Some appeared entirely innocent. Others did not. The hearings attracted unprecedented attention. Marcus attended whenever possible. The atmosphere felt unusual. For years, he had watched judges question defendants. Now judges stood as defendants themselves. The reversal fascinated the public. Inside the courtroom, advocates argued intensely. The accused claimed misunderstandings, political enemies, accounting errors, coincidences. Investigators responded with documents and witnesses. The battle continued for months. When verdicts finally arrived, Rome paid attention. Several judges were acquitted. The evidence against them proved insufficient. Others were convicted. The punishments reflected the seriousness of their position. Removal from office, confiscation of wealth, exile, public disgrace. One elderly judge reportedly wept when the sentence was read, not because he feared poverty, because his reputation, built over decades, vanished in a single afternoon. Marcus found that detail particularly tragic, not because he pitied corruption, because it demonstrated how fragile status could be. A lifetime of achievement sometimes rested upon a foundation thinner than people realized. The scandal eventually ended. The courts continued operating. New judges replaced old ones. The legal system survived. Rome always moved forward. Yet the event left a lasting impression. For years afterward, citizens referenced the case whenever discussing fairness. Trust, once damaged, required time to rebuild. As Marcus entered his 60th year, another pattern became increasingly noticeable. Many punishments focused less upon physical suffering than earlier generations imagined. Executions certainly occurred. So did floggings. So did forced labor. Yet financial penalties appeared everywhere. Property seizures, confiscations, fines, restrictions. Rome understood something fundamental. Money represented power, influence, opportunity. Taking wealth often achieved objectives that violence could not. One afternoon, a wealthy landowner entered the bakery. The man seemed distracted, concerned. After some conversation, Marcus learned the reason. A dispute involving taxes threatened several large estates. Investigators suspected widespread underreporting of agricultural production. If proven, the penalties could be devastating, not because anyone expected executions, because the financial consequences could destroy fortunes. The landowner shook his head. My grandfather feared soldiers. He sighed heavily. I fear accountants. Marcus laughed despite himself. Yet the observation contained truth. Empires evolve. Methods evolve. Punishments evolve. The purpose often remains unchanged. Maintaining order, protecting authority, preserving revenue. A few months later, Marcus received troubling news regarding Titus. His old friend had fallen ill. Age finally began demanding payment. For decades, Titus had lived among records, hearings, and official documents. Now he spent more time resting than working. Marcus visited frequently. Their conversations often returned to the same subjects: the law, justice, punishment, human nature. One evening, while sitting beside a small oil lamp, Marcus asked a question. After all these years, it felt appropriate. What punishment do officials fear most? Titus smiled weakly. His hair was completely white now, his hands thinner than before. The same thing everyone fears. Marcus waited. Titus stared toward the lamp. Irrelevance. The answer surprised him. Titus noticed. You've spent years watching criminals. The old clerk coughed lightly. I spent years watching officials. He smiled faintly. Most people want to matter. Marcus considered that. Titus continued. Executions are rare. Exile is rare. Most people never face either. He adjusted his blanket, but losing influence. The old man paused, losing importance. His voice softened. That frightens almost everyone. The conversation lingered in Marcus's thoughts long afterward, perhaps because age made such concerns feel increasingly relevant. Youth focuses on survival. Old age often focuses on legacy. The following winter proved particularly harsh. Cold winds swept through Rome. Rain arrived frequently. Business slowed. People spent more time indoors. During this period, reports emerged of growing unrest among prisoners in several provincial facilities. Nothing dramatic initially. Complaints, arguments, minor disturbances. Then conditions worsened. A prison riot erupted in one region. Another followed elsewhere. Authorities reacted swiftly. Prisons served a specific purpose: containment, control. Disorder within them represented failure. Investigations followed. Officials examined conditions, security procedures, administrative decisions. Some prisoners received additional punishments. Some administrators faced consequences as well. The response revealed another aspect of Roman governance. Responsibility occasionally traveled upward. Not always, not consistently, yet sometimes authorities acknowledged that poor management contributed to disorder. Marcus found that reassuring. The law seemed more credible when it examined causes alongside consequences. Years continued passing. The city changed again. New monuments appeared. Old buildings deteriorated. Children became adults. Adults became elders. Marcus increasingly viewed Rome itself as a living thing. Immense, complicated, contradictory, capable of both cruelty and sophistication, capable of wisdom and injustice, often simultaneously. One spring morning, a young customer asked him whether Roman punishments truly worked. The question produced immediate debate inside the bakery. Several workers insisted severe penalties discouraged crime. Others disagreed. People continued committing offenses despite risks. The discussion lasted nearly an hour. Marcus mostly listened. Finally, someone asked his opinion. He thought carefully. Decades of observation deserved more than a quick answer. Sometimes they work. The response drew laughter. The workers expected something deeper. Marcus smiled. People often think punishment prevents crime. He looked around the room. Sometimes it does. He paused. Sometimes it doesn't. The room quieted. Human beings are complicated. No one argued, because everyone knew examples supporting both sides. Fear prevented some crimes. Desperation inspired others. Greed ignored consequences. Anger ignored reason. No law could eliminate human nature entirely. Rome understood this better than many assumed. The goal was rarely perfection. The goal was management, reduction, control. The empire did not expect a world without crime. It expected a world where crime remained limited enough to govern. As Marcus reflected upon the countless cases he had witnessed, another realization slowly emerged. The punishments themselves told a story, not merely about criminals, about Rome. Every sentence revealed what the empire valued, what it feared, what it protected. Murder punished because life mattered. Theft punished because property mattered. Counterfeiting punished because trust mattered. Treason punished because authority mattered. Every consequence reflected priorities. Every verdict revealed assumptions. The law functioned almost like a mirror, and as Marcus approached old age, he found himself studying that reflection more carefully than ever before. Because after decades of watching Rome punish criminals, he had begun to suspect that the most interesting thing about punishment was not what it said about the guilty. It was what it revealed about the society doing the punishing. The realization stayed with Marcus for many years, long after famous trials faded from memory, long after judges, magistrates, merchants, soldiers, and criminals disappeared from public discussion. The thought continued returning whenever he walked through Rome's streets. Punishment revealed priorities. Punishment revealed fears. Punishment revealed values. And perhaps nothing revealed those things more clearly than the final years of his life. By now, Marcus was an old man. His hair had turned completely gray. His hands carried the marks of decades spent working dough before sunrise. The bakery belonged largely to younger relatives. Most days, he no longer managed deliveries. Instead, he sat near the entrance, greeting familiar customers and watching the city flow past. Rome remained enormous, busy, noisy, yet Marcus observed it differently now. Age changes perspective. When young, people notice movement. When old, they notice patterns. One autumn afternoon, Titus visited the bakery for what would become one of their final long conversations. The old clerk moved slowly, far more slowly than before. Years of work had taken their toll. The two friends sat outside as the sun began descending behind distant rooftops. For a while, neither spoke. They simply watched people passing through the street, children running, merchants negotiating, laborers returning home, soldiers moving between assignments, life continuing. Eventually, Marcus broke the silence. Do you ever think about all those cases? Titus smiled faintly. Every day. Marcus nodded. So do I. Another quiet moment passed. Then Titus spoke. We spent decades watching punishment. Marcus laughed softly. We certainly did. The old clerk leaned back carefully. And yet most people misunderstand it. Marcus looked toward him. How so? Titus considered the question, then answered slowly. People think punishment is about the past. The crime happened. The state responds. The matter ends. Marcus nodded. That seemed reasonable. Titus shook his head. It is rarely about the past. Marcus frowned slightly. What is it about then? The old clerk pointed toward the busy street. The future. The answer lingered between them. Titus continued. The victim belongs to the past. The crime belongs to the past. The investigation belongs to the past. But punishment, he gestured toward the city. Punishment is for everyone who watches. Marcus remained silent, because after all these years, he knew the statement was true. Every flogging, every fine, every exile, every execution, every confiscation, every sentence carried a message. Sometimes the message was simple, sometimes complicated, but it always existed. The empire wanted people to see consequences, wanted people to remember, wanted people to calculate risks before acting. Punishment was communication, and Rome communicated constantly. Winter arrived shortly afterward. The cold settled over the city. Business slowed. Rain darkened the streets. Then one morning, news spread that Titus had died peacefully during the night. Marcus sat alone for a long time after hearing it, not speaking, not moving, simply remembering. Decades of conversations, decades of observations, decades spent discussing law, justice, authority, and human nature. The city suddenly felt quieter, not because Rome had changed, because one familiar voice had disappeared. The funeral was modest, respectful. Several former colleagues attended. A few officials, friends, family members. No grand monuments followed. No public speeches. Yet Marcus suspected Titus would have preferred it that way. The old clerk had spent his life recording the stories of others. He never sought to become one himself. Afterward, Marcus continued his routine, but something had changed. The years seemed shorter now. Time moved faster. The faces around him grew younger. The city he had known transformed gradually into a city belonging to another generation. New magistrates sat in courts. New criminals appeared before them. New punishments were imposed. The cycle continued without pause. One spring afternoon, a young law student entered the bakery. The student recognized Marcus from local stories. Apparently, several people knew of the old baker who had spent decades observing legal proceedings. The young man asked an unusual question. If you could change one thing about Roman punishment, what would it be? Marcus smiled. The question felt impossible. For a moment, he considered refusing to answer. Then he spoke. Certainty. The student looked confused. Certainty. Marcus nodded. I have seen guilty people punished. I have seen innocent people accused. I have seen honest investigations. I have seen mistakes. He folded his hands. The law always wants certainty. His eyes moved toward the street. but people rarely provide it. The student remained thoughtful. Marcus continued. Most punishments become easier to understand once guilt is certain. He paused. The difficult cases are the uncertain ones. The young man thanked him and left. Marcus watched him disappear into the crowd, then smiled slightly. Perhaps the next generation would ask better questions, or perhaps they would struggle with the same questions forever. Human nature rarely changed as quickly as governments hoped. Years passed, more friends died, more memories accumulated. Marcus himself grew increasingly frail. Walking became difficult. Long days became exhausting. Eventually, he spent most of his time sitting outside the bakery, observing life rather than participating in it. One evening, shortly before sunset, he watched several children playing near the road. Their laughter echoed between buildings. A soldier passed carrying supplies. A merchant argued over prices. A woman hurried home carrying vegetables. Ordinary life. The same ordinary life he had spent decades watching. And suddenly, he realized something. For all Rome's punishments, for all Rome's courts, for all Rome's laws, most people would never stand before a judge. Most people would never experience exile. Most people would never face execution. Most people simply wanted to live quietly, work, eat, love, raise children, grow old. The law spent enormous energy dealing with exceptions. Crime attracted attention because it was unusual. Punishment attracted attention because it was dramatic. Yet ordinary life remained the true story of the empire. Millions of people living ordinary days beneath extraordinary institutions. The realization brought him comfort because it reminded him that Rome was more than prisons and courts, more than criminals and punishments, more than authority and fear. It was also bakers, farmers, merchants, teachers, children, families, people trying to navigate life as best they could. Years earlier, Marcus had entered a workshop and discovered a dead bronze worker. That moment changed everything. It introduced him to a world he never expected to study, a world of investigations, trials, judgments, consequences. Now, at the end of his life, he finally understood what decades of observation had taught him. Punishment mattered, justice mattered, law mattered, but none of them existed for their own sake. They existed because societies hoped to preserve something larger. Order, stability, trust. Sometimes they succeeded. Sometimes they failed. Sometimes they produced wisdom. Sometimes they produced tragedy. Yet the effort continued generation after generation, because every society eventually confronts the same question. How should people respond when others break the rules that allow communities to function? Rome answered that question in many ways, some harsh, some thoughtful, some effective, some flawed. but always revealing, always instructive, and always deeply human. Years later, long after Marcus himself was gone, the empire would continue punishing criminals. New judges would sit where old judges once sat. New defendants would stand where old defendants once stood. New citizens would debate fairness exactly as previous generations had done. The names would change. The arguments would remain familiar, because while empires rise and fall, the struggle to balance justice, mercy, authority, and human nature never truly ends. If you want to continue the journey, the next video is waiting.